Well, good morning. It is good to be here with you. It's good to turn our attention to a new study this morning. Finishing up in Proverbs, it just felt natural to move then into the book of Ecclesiastes. It teaches a lot of the same principles, but in a very different way, in a very practical way. And I wanted to take some time to go through the book to look at these big lessons. This is a very, very unique book, unlike any other book in the Bible, because of who wrote it and what God allowed him to do. But as we kind of begin, I want to start off with our first slide, because during this series, we're going to have regular homework, because it's going to be good for you to be aware of the book and to get into the book, because we're dealing with big principles here, larger sections, and it's going to be very helpful for you if we take the time to read through these things beforehand so that we can really grasp what's going on in the book. It's laid out very differently from Proverbs. So, homework overview. The homework was to read through chapter 1 of Ecclesiastes 3 times. Now, I'm not going to ask for a raise of hands, but I hope that you guys were able to at least read through it once. It's only 18 chapters, just to get yourself acclimated to the book and to the purpose of it. Because as I said, this is a very, very unique book. Its purpose is a little bit different. Its topic is dark is not the right word, but a lot more hard-hitting. Because his purpose is to help us understand the very essence of what life is about. It was written more towards the end of Solomon's life. Generally, people see Song of Solomon as the more passionate book when he was perhaps younger. Proverbs is a book that he wrote during the course of his reign as king, and it just reflects all throughout his life, people combining everything that he said and putting it all together into one book. But Ecclesiastes is probably, they think, written towards the end of Solomon's life. So as he looks back on his life, he wants us to have the conclusion of it. This is what everything was about. So it's full of life experiences and all the lessons that Solomon learned. This is a book that has a level of hardness to it because Solomon is looking back at his mistakes. He's looking back on everything that he did wrong. And he's saying, after all of those different things, after all of the mistakes that I made, I tried all of these different things, I want you to know what my results are. Because this is a book which is an experiment. Solomon conducted an experiment to answer the question, is life worth living, or what is the purpose of life? God gave him a tremendous amount of wisdom, and Solomon set out, I have all of this wisdom, I have all of this ability, I'm going to find out what life is, if life is worth living. What's the purpose of life? I have infinite wealth available to me. I have all the wisdom, more than anyone else in the world. So my life is going to be an experiment. I'm going to try everything. And then I want to give you the conclusion. The purpose of life, or is life worth living, is a question that every single person wants to understand. They want to know that. Everybody wants to know, why am I here? What am I supposed to do? What's the reason for it? Warren Wiersbe, in his book, he quotes this. He says, the American poet Carl Sandburg compared life to an onion. You peel it off one layer at a time, and sometimes you weep. Some people see this just kind of inevitable over and over idea where you're just peeling life away 1 year at a time, and sometimes you're crying because it's just tough. And that's the whole thing about life. It's just one layer at a time, and some layers are good, and then sometimes you cry. Another man wrote, "Most men eddy about here and there, eat and drink, chatter and love and hate. They gather and squander, are raised aloft, are hurled in the dust, striving blindly, achieving nothing, and then they die." A lot of people see life this way. There's an endlessness, a hopelessness to it. So at our core, everybody who is alive wants to answer the question, is life worth living? And that's the question that Solomon sets out to answer in Ecclesiastes. He wants us to know, what are the different aspects of life that are worth it? How can I live a life that means something? Where should I put my energy? What are the things worth doing? So I love the book because of that. And that question is posed in the first 3 verses of Ecclesiastes. Ecclesiastes 1, the first 3 verses says, "The words of the preacher, the son of David, king in Jerusalem." Now, he doesn't actually say that he doesn't identify himself throughout the book. Solomon doesn't. But through how he is described, we know that Solomon wrote it. I'm not entirely sure why he didn't just come out and say, "I'm Solomon, I'm the son of David, and I wrote this." But this is the way it's written. Then he gets in verse 2 and 3, he says, "Vanity of vanities, all is vanity. Vanity of vanities, saith the preacher." He identifies himself as a preacher. He wants to convey to us what he has learned. "Vanity of vanities, all is vanity. What profit hath a man of all his labor which he taketh under the sun?" Solomon was struggling to understand what the purpose of everything was. And so he said, I'm giving my life as an experiment to find out what profit is there to all the effort of living. There's several words in there that are going to come up a lot in the book of Ecclesiastes. And so I want to spend just a little time on some of these. And the first is vanity. He says, everything is vanity. Vanity, it's used 38 times. It means, well, nothing. It's meaningless. It's the quality of having no value or significance as a result of being futile or insubstantial or absurd or incomprehensible. He basically, at the very start of the book, says, all human effort, every experience, it lacks real value and satisfying substance. He gets to the end of his life and he looks back and he says, all the stuff that I've done, it just seems meaningless now. He has a very human perspective to this book. He wants us to understand what living this life separate from God is going to look like. So after living everything, he looks back on his life and a life separate from God, and he says, looking back on everything, it's just meaningless. I have spent all of my effort doing all of this stuff, and at the end of it, I look back and I just think, why? What was it for? What have I accomplished? So that word vanity is going to come up a lot as he looks back on a life without God and all of the effort that he expended in it. And he says it's vanity. Then in the next verse, he says, what profiteth a man in all his labor which he taketh under the sun? That's where we understand his perspective. What's under the sun? It's used 29 times, that little phrase, and it's a key phrase because it shows to us, as I said, the perspective from which the book was written. So Solomon set about to figure out, under the sun, without God's involvement, what is the meaning of life? If you take out God from the equation, what does all of your effort under the sun look like? What does it do for you? So it's life from a human perspective from down here on earth. It's the footsteps you take every day. When you subtract God from it, this is what you get. At the beginning of verse 3, he says, what profit? That's a word that's going to come up as well. Profit, it's exactly the opposite of vanity. It talks about advantage, it talks about gain. And the idea is, after you have worked your whole life, what do you have to show for it? Whereas vanity is something that is meaningless, profit is something that has great value. So he starts out in his book and he looks back and he has a very difficult view of things. He looks back and he says, it just seems like all is meaningless stuff. I've spent my whole life working and putting my effort into different projects and different things, and I find that there's actually no real value to where I am right now. The last word there in verse 3, what profit hath a man of all his labor? Labor means to toil to the point of exhaustion and yet experience little or no fulfillment in your work. So the aim of the book, here at the very beginning, is to help us understand when you remove God from the equation, life doesn't seem to have meaning. It's just one cycle after another. And he said, I lived my whole life and I put my effort into all of these different things. But at the end of my life, when you subtract God from it, after all of my effort, I find that I have nothing to show for it. So the aim of the book, Solomon is presenting the very real problem that faces everyone in this world. Is life worth living? And before he shares with us the conclusions of everything from his experience and from his wisdom, he wants everyone to take an honest look at life. So I want you to look back at your life, not so that you can have a midlife crisis and wondering what you're doing with your life, but so that you can understand that there is a purpose to life, but it's not found in all of the effort that you expend outside of God. Chapters 1 and 2 are kind of tied together here in this introduction. So I wanted to give you a brief overview of the chapters. Chapters 1 and 2, they present the futility of life before his final conclusion. At the end of each section, he includes a mini conclusion. At the end of chapter 2, he includes that little conclusion. So the first two chapters are talking about the futility of life. It shows how Solomon has conducted this lifetime experiment in order to find the answer to our question, is life worth living? Solomon investigated the meaning of life, and now he shares his findings. And chapter 2, at the end of it, has a brief, let me give you an update as we work our way through. In chapter 1, he presents the first of the problems that face people who want to live life without God. And that is, first of all, the monotony of life. As you can see, there's a bit of a darker tone, because he really wants people to understand what life looks like when God's not involved. Verse 4, one generation passeth away, and another generation cometh, but the earth abideth forever. The sun also ariseth, the sun goeth down, and hasteth to his place where he arose. The wind goeth toward the south, and turneth about unto the north. It whirleth about continually. The wind returneth again according to its circuits. All the rivers run into the sea, yet the sea is not full. Into the place from whence the rivers come, whither they return again. All things are full of labor. Man cannot utter it. The eye is not satisfied with seeing, nor the ear filled with hearing. So the first thing that he did was to look at the world around him. as he tried to answer the question, what is the purpose of life, he looked at the world around him. And he got a little frustrated because he looked at the earth. And he looked and he saw that it basically just keeps on going. Generation after generation, it just goes on the same. The earth abideth forever. People live and they die, the earth just keeps right on going. Then he looked at the sun and he saw the same thing happens. The sun rises, the sun goeth down, it hasteth to the place where it arose. If you're living for this life and only this life, if God is not involved, then it's just, there's a monotony to it. The sun rises in the morning, it sets in the evening, and it's going to keep doing that all the time. There's just a monotony to life. He looked at the wind, and he saw this endless cycle. The wind, it goes towards the south, or it goes south, it goes north, it just keeps going. Constantly in motion, always just, it's the same thing. He looked at even the water cycle. It rains, goes into the rivers row to the sea, it evaporates, it's up in the cloud, and then it rains again. It's just this constant water cycle. So he looks at the things that are around him and he says, I've looked at all these things, I've looked at the science. And if you subtract God from the picture, life is just so monotonous. What's the purpose? When you subtract God from it, just things keep going and going and going. And then he presents a problem with that as well, the human condition. He looks at it. He says, the things that have been is that which shall be, and the things which is done is that which shall be done. There is no new thing under the sun. Is there anything whereof it may be said, see, this is new? It hath been already of old time, which was before us. There is no remembrance of former things, neither shall there be any remembrance of things that are to come with those that shall come after. So he looked at human nature. He looked at how we function. And deep inside of us, we have a desire for something new, something different. But he says, as I look around, nothing actually satisfies. In the world around us, new things are all the time. There's always new stuff popping up. But nothing's actually new because nothing satisfies that desire for us. It's just constant. If we buy the newest phone, a few months later, there's a new one. You get a new car, a few years later, well, there's just a new one. That's the cycle of things. Human nature is yearning for something that's legitimately new and different from this constant cycle that we're stuck in. And he says, I looked around and I saw these things and I realized there's nothing new that can actually satisfy our desire for something else, for something more. The things that are around us, they're just recombinations of old things. From the time when he was around to now, people are still people. Still struggle with the same things. We still want the same things. Just cultures change. The things around us change. But he said, I looked at the earth and there was just this monotony to it. And I looked to human nature. And I saw that people are never satisfied. It's just this constant cycle. When you take God out of the picture, there's nothing there that can satisfy. He had all the money in the world and all the wisdom, and he gave it the experiment. He said, I'm going to give it the good old college try. I'm going to try to live a life without God, with every possible positive that I can have, to not deny myself anything. And he said, at the end of it, I just find that there's a monotony to it, and there's nothing that actually satisfies. So while the book has definitely a little bit of a darker tone than Proverbs does, it is one of the most necessary books for us to understand. Because fundamentally, the world around us, it frustrates us. Because we see that there's nothing in it that can actually satisfy. While a sunrise is beautiful, it's not enough to satisfy my soul. even if you have everything and live in the most beautiful places, you're still going to struggle, life is still going to be difficult, and there's still going to be trials. So he says, I just find it frustrating. And I look around and I see people are not satisfied because there's nothing that's actually different from the cycle that life gives you. Everyone at some point or another looks at their life and at their work and thinks, what am I doing? I've worked for all of these years. What do I have to show for it? We want something different, something better, something new. And Ecclesiastes is a wonderful showcase as Solomon looks to everything and he says, the world can't give me what I actually want. So he says, I look at the creation, and it just keeps going. I look at human nature, and I see it's never satisfied. So my conclusion, he says, after I've looked at everything under the sun, is without God involved, he said, it's just vanity. It's empty. Next week we'll look a little bit more at it. But at the end of chapter 2, he gives his first little conclusion. He says, there is nothing better for a man than that he should eat and drink and that he should make his soul enjoy good in his labor. This also I saw, that it was from the hand of God. For who can eat, or who else can hasten hereunto more than I? For God giveth to a man that is good in his sight wisdom and knowledge and joy, but to the sinner he giveth travail to gather, to heap up, that he may give to him that is good before God. That is also vanity and vexation of spirit. So as he looks at the monotony of creation, at the frustration that comes from human nature just not getting what we want, he says, my conclusion is, when you have God in your life, when you understand and trust God, you can live a life of joy because you know that there is a future to it. But if you subtract God from the picture, those same gifts that God has given to us just end up being travail and monotony and a lack of satisfaction. You see, Christians and non-Christians, we all live in the same world. What allows a Christian to have joy is knowing that this world is not our permanent home. If all you have is the sunrise, it will very quickly lose its appeal. But if you know that heaven is coming, I can look at a sunrise and say, you know, that's beautiful. I can go to work and I can enjoy what I'm doing with my hands, knowing there's something much better to come. So I'm going to take the gifts that God has given me right here and I'm going to enjoy them. But if you subtract God from the equation and all you're left with is work, I guess I got to go to work today. So I just do the same thing tomorrow. Next week I'm going to wake up on Monday and going to go to work again. Come Friday, I'm going to be happy it's over. Then on Monday, I'm going to go to work again. There's a monotony to it when God is not involved. So at the end of this experiment that Solomon does, he looks and he says, understand that life and the things in it are a gift. But when you remove God, all of those things are a travail, are a trial. We need Ecclesiastes probably more than any other book. Because every single person that's alive wants to answer the question, is this worth it? Is this all I'm going to get? When I wake up tomorrow and go to work, is that as good as it gets? When I see the sunrise, is that the most beautiful thing I'll see? Or is there more beyond that? Are these few years of my life all that there is? And the fact is, only God provides something more that satisfies in our lives. Proverbs is a wonderful practical book. Ecclesiastes is the big stick that comes down on life and says, let me tell you exactly what life is like, and you need to answer if it's worth it without God in it. I love the book. And I hope that as we go through, it can help us to see that there is joy in the gifts that God has given in life if we understand what God is doing and what our life is worth. When you subtract God, the things that are gifts become trials. Next week, for your homework, I want you to find something that appears new, but is actually old. And I want us to share a few of those so that we can see around us some of those examples. And also I want you to read Ecclesiastes chapter 1 once more. We're going to be looking at the first 2 chapters there next week. I hope that this study will be profitable to you, that it'll answer some questions and allow us to have joy in life, because the things around us, the beauty of the sunrise and even work, is a gift that God has given, which can be enjoyed when we understand its purpose. So let's pray. Dear Heavenly Father, we thank you for all that you've done for us. We thank you for books like Ecclesiastes that don't skirt around the issues, that don't try to pretend like things are fine, but they help us to understand the meaning of life. How we can wake up in the morning and keep going. Why we should, and how we can have joy in the midst of life. So I thank you for all that you've done for us in your name. Amen.